Come on in. Let's go talk about pocket knives.
For this project, I have an old Robeson sure edge pocket knife to repair. This design, a small two-bladed knife with a large clip point blade and a pin as the secondary blade, is commonly called a peanut by most knife collectors. This one has been used, though the blades are still nice and full. It would be in good condition if it were not for that big piece of bone that's chipped off the front of it. After cleaning the tang stamp enough to read it, it says Robeson Sure Edge Rochester. The small tang stamp reads Robeson USA Cutlery. These both point to it being manufactured between 1922 and 1939. Another item that can be used to verify the knife's pedigree is to decode the model number if it has one. This one is model number 622393. According to research into Robeson's numbering system from the AAPK website, which is allaboutpocketknives.com, the first digit, 6, is for a bone handle, or on newer knives it could represent Delrin plastic. The second digit, 2, is for the number of blades. The third digit, also a 2, means it should have nickel silver bolsters and brass liners. The last 3 digits represent the pattern number of the knife frame. So all of these clues indicate this knife is legitimately 85 to 100 years old. Now I'm going to do what I categorize as an original style repair. That is to keep as much of the original knife as possible. So rather than replacing the front handle, I'm going to patch that missing part. I'll first begin by cleaning the area. The epoxy that I'll use will not stick well to oil and dirt that's in the knife. Sometimes you may even have to drill tiny holes into the bone or small divots into the brass to give it more surface area to hold on to. In this case, the patch is so small that it may not be necessary. Secondly, I'll use some painter's tape to create a form around the knife. Without something to hold the epoxy into place, most of it would run down over the side of the knife and be gone. This thin little wall of tape will hold it nicely. Next, I'll mix some 2-part clear epoxy. I'm using a fairly inexpensive pouring resin that you mix in equal parts. Some knife mechanics use specific epoxies that are rated for higher strength, probably will work a lot better. But I believe the 2 main things to look for in an epoxy is one that dries clear and that fully hardens without having a rubbery texture. Now, to match the color, you want to use powdered pigments rather than liquid colors. There are special pigments that can be purchased, but I created this powder by sanding a piece of walnut hardwood with a rotary tool sander, catching the dust on these pieces of paper. In the past, I've also used spices from our kitchen. They're inexpensive and often come in a variety of colors that can be mixed. Cinnamon does well at matching old red bone. Once it's mixed well, I will use a small craft stick to add drops of the colored epoxy into the affected area. Put enough of it that it mounds up just a little above the surrounding bone. You can sand that down, but you can't add more without removing this patch and starting over. After the patch is cured for a few days, you can remove the tape. There'll be a ridge standing along the edge where it climbed up the tape, and you can just file or sand that off. Finish it with a fine sandpaper, 400 grit or so, trying to match the contour of the surrounding handle material and make sure we get off anything that went over onto the bolster or the back springs. Using a ball burr on a rotary tool, match the jigging pattern of the surrounding handle. Now I begin by cleaning out the old bone where the epoxy ran into those little divots and grooves. I clean those first, moving outward into the new patch area. Now, if you're unsure, just practice on a piece of scrap wood first, but I've been able to pretty easily match most jigging patterns fairly closely. The channels that I'm carving look different at first because they're filled with white dust from the epoxy. Every so often, wipe it off with an oily rag and you can see things better. Here I'm using a smaller bit to carve in the small channels and grooves to give it some fine detail. In these close-up pictures, you can see that it's not a perfect patch. The color is a bit too dark and too uniform. Real bone has beautiful variations of color, especially out in the light. But after a quick polish on the wheel, it matches well enough to make this antique knife beautiful and usable again.